So I am going to introduce our moderator for tonight. Karen Schreck is the author of 3 novels, and her short stories and articles have appeared in several literary journals and magazines and have received various awards, including a Pushcart Prize, Illinois State Art Council grant, and first prize awards for memoir and devotional magazine writing from the Evangelical Press Association. And she is our community engagement associate here at the library. She also runs all 3 of our fiction book clubs, which is such a large book club. We meet 3 times a week and we are always looking for new members, and one of them meets virtually on Zoom. So anyone is welcome. And she also facilitates our writers group, which meets the 3rd Thursday of each month. And that is also on Zoom, and welcome to everyone. So Karen, I'm going to hand it over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. Welcome everyone in the audience, and a special welcome to Sonia, Hank, Wanda, and Hannah. We're so glad you're with us tonight. Thank you for being here. I'm going to dig right into introducing our panelists because we want to have as much time for conversation as we can. So I'll begin with Sonia. As an author of Punjabi and Bengali heritage, S.C. Lalli writes romance and women's fiction novels under her full name, Sonia Lalli. Sonia's debut romance novel, The Matchmaker's List, was a Target diverse book club pick, and her books have been featured in Entertainment Weekly, USA Today, NPR, The Washington Post, Glamour, and more. Her thriller novel, Are You Sarah, won a coveted spot on the Canadian fiction bestseller list in the Toronto Star and the Globe and Mail. Sonia studied law in her hometown of Saskatoon, Canada, and at Columbia University in New York. Sonia has worked in law, legal journalism, and book publishing. She lives in Vancouver with her husband. Welcome, Sonia, again. Hank Phillippi Ryan is the on-air investigative reporter for Boston's WHDH-TV. She's won 37 Emmys and dozens more journalism honors. The nationally best-selling author of 13 thrillers, Ryan's also an award winner in her second profession, with 5 Agathas, 3 Anthonys, 2 McCavities, the Daphne, and for The Other Woman, the coveted Mary Higgins Clark Award. Critics call Hank a master of suspense and a superb and gifted storyteller, and she is the only author to have won the Agatha in 4 different categories: Best First, Best Novel, Best Short Story, and Best Nonfiction. Welcome, Hank.
Thank you.
Wanda M. Morris is the acclaimed author of All Her Little Secrets, which was named as one of the best books of 2021 by Hudson Booksellers and selected as the #1 top pick for library reads by librarians across the country. All Her Little Secrets was also selected as a Book Buzz pick by Good Morning America, serialized in Entertainment Weekly, and was a Marie Claire Book Club pick. Her new book, Anywhere You Run, which came out just 2 days ago, has already been named as one of, quote, 15 standout historical fiction books to read this year, end quote, by Oprah Daily. Anywhere You Run has also received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Library Journal, and Booklist. In addition to her career as an author, Wanda is a corporate attorney. She is married, the mother of 3, and lives in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, Wanda.
Thank you.
Internationally best-selling author Hannah Mary McKinnon was born in the UK, grew up in Switzerland, and moved to Canada in 2010. Her sting in the tail suspense novels include The Neighbors, Her Secret Son, Sister Dear, You Will Remember Me, and her latest, Never Coming Home. Her first Christmas romantic comedy, The Christmas Wager, is scheduled for publication in the fall of 2023, under the pseudonym Holly Cassidy, and she promises to not bump off any characters in that novel. Hannah Mary lives in Oakville, Ontario, with her husband and 3 sons. And welcome back, Hannah.
Thank you. Thank you.
So thank you again for being with us tonight at WPL. And as to our audience, we're going to be in conversation with these 4 fantastic novelists. But before we launch the panel discussion, I'm delighted to say that Sonia, Hank, Wanda, and Hannah Mary have generously agreed to share a bit about and read briefly from their most recent novels. So we have the rare opportunity here to hear from not just one author, but 4, and to hear her work in her own words, in her voice, which is just a wonderful opportunity. So, Sonia, let's begin with you. Your novel, Are You Sarah, has received terrific reviews from critics and readers alike, including a starred review from Publishers Weekly, which declared that you've, quote, ventured from the romance genre into thriller territory with exhilarating results. The twisty plot of Are You Sarah upsets conventional expectations while shining a light on casual sexism and racism, end quote. Sonia, would you mind telling us a little bit more about Are You Sarah?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. And thank you so much for having me and all of us. I'm really excited to chat to some amazing authors. So this is my book, Are You Sarah? It's essentially about 2 women named Sarah who have a chance meeting at a campus bar. One of them is Sarah Badri. She's South Asian. She's the daughter of blue-collar immigrants putting herself through law school. The other one is Sarah Ellis. She's 20 years old. She is a bit of a brat, but she's more layers behind that. They accidentally take each other's ride shares home. We follow Sarah Badri. When she realizes her mistake, she ends up at the other Sarah's house. She walks home and she finds the other Sarah dead on her doorstep. So it's sort of about which Sarah was supposed to die, because Sarah Badri believes that she was the intended target. And of course, we have to figure out why would she believe that someone was trying to kill her. So I'm just going to read a short passage from Sarah's perspective. I don't want to dive too much into the premise and spoiler, so I just want to give you a sense of Sarah's character. This is our alive Sarah, not our dead Sarah. I do make it less confusing in the book. And she is, a lot of people think she's just a good Indian girl, but she's not what people expect. She's dark, she's cynical, she's ruthless. I catch sight of my professor, Madison Miles, across the lawn, schmoozing, and I offer her a small wave of gratitude. It was her that I thought of when I arrived home at the condo one evening to find my boyfriend studying at the kitchen table, having waited for me to organize his dinner, and the idea of being his little Indian wife made me sick to my stomach. The thought of spending my life smaller, nicer, weaker for him, kill me now. I could be Madison Miles easily. I could be a strong woman of color who follows the rules and breaks down barriers in the conventional way. The sort of woman who is a decent lawyer and a half-decent mother, who likes to believe she is exceptional in her ability to have it all. The thing is, I don't particularly like children, or when a man tells me what to do. And Madison Miles may be a role model, but she's not my role model. I had a taste of something special, a glimpse of how the other half live, and I want more than what society has told me is acceptable. I want to pay down my family's debts and buy them the life they deserve. I want to pay my sister's way at the college of her choice. But most of all, I want to be rich. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I can already feel how complicated that character is and proves to be, having read the book. It's wonderful. Thank you. Hank, in a starred review, Kirkus states that Her Perfect Life, quote, keeps the reader guessing about characters' identities and different versions of events as the tension mounts. A well-crafted plot and strong female characters drive a satisfying psychological thriller. In another starred review, Publishers Weekly calls your latest novel superlative, a fast-paced, surprise-packed treat. So please share more.
Thank you so much for having me here tonight. I love when I opened that email that got the starred review saying it's a fast-paced superlative thriller from Publishers Weekly. I got to tell you, there was a whoop that went up here in my office here in Boston. Nothing could be better than that. That's just great. As you said, this is Her Perfect Life, my 13th novel of suspense. Look at that cover. Is she not great? And it's, of course, ironic because no one has a perfect life. Her Perfect Life is a fast-paced cat and mouse thriller. I want you to miss your stop on the subway because you can't stop reading it. It stars Lalli Atwood. Lalli Atwood is a television reporter, and she is so famous and so beloved that her viewers have created a hashtag for her, #PerfectLilly. And everyone knows who Lalli Atwood is, and that may be her biggest problem, because Lalli seems to have everything. She has fame, she has fortune, she has Emmys. She's the happy mom of an adorable 7-year-old daughter. But Lalli also has a dark secret, a dark career-ending, life-ruining secret. And it seems like someone is about to tell that secret. And Lalli soon learns that the spotlight is the most dangerous place of all, and that is her perfect life. So let me read you from the beginning of it. Every book has an inciting incident, something that topples over the dominoes to make the book happen, and that is at the beginning of Her Perfect Life. So I will read you a little bit of that. They say you can't choose your family, but if you could, I would still have chosen Cassie. She was my big sister, and everything she did was perfect. Her perfect dark hair, which curled or didn't, depending on what Cassie wanted. She had perfect friends and perfect dates and whispered phone calls, and boys came to pick her up in their cars. She got to wear lipstick. Once when I sneaked hers and tried it, she caught me. She didn't even laugh or yell or tell on me. When she left for college, Mama kept her room just the way it was, with all her stuffed animals and souvenirs and photographs, and didn't let me move out of my little bedroom into her bigger one. Cassie was always the favorite, and I always thought of it as her right. That first college winter vacation, my mother found a notebook, one of those black ones with white dots on the cover. She opened it to the first page. I saw her face change. Without a word, Mama turned the notebook to show me. Cassie had drawn a calendar with carefully ruled pencil lines spaced equally apart. November, then December. She'd crossed off the days, each one with an X in black marker. Poor Cassie, Mama said to me. And then Cassie was gone. What happened to Cassie? I imagined her dead, of course. I imagined her kidnapped, imprisoned, hidden, brainwashed, indentured, made into a princess, transported by aliens to their faraway planet. I saw her in grocery stores or in book covers, in the backgrounds of movies, a lifted shoulder or sunlight on a cheekbone, that little dance she did when she was happy. I once saw the back of her head 3 rows in front of me on a plane from Boston to New Orleans and leaped out of my seat with the seatbelt sign still on. But it wasn't her dark hair and not her thin shoulders, not her quizzical smile after my lame, "Oh, I thought I knew you" excuse. Would I even recognize my big sister after all this time? I was 7 when she vanished and Cassie was 18, so maybe, or maybe not, or maybe she'll recognize me. She'll find me. And that is the beginning of Her Perfect Life.
Great. Thank you so much. Wanda, Lisa Unger, New York Times bestselling author, calls Anywhere You Run, quote, wise, riveting, and full of surprises, and says the story will keep you up past your bedtime and stay with you long after the book is closed, end quote. And in its review, Booklist stated, quote, this riveting and moving novel with echoes of Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God, is highly recommended for fans of suspense and women's fiction, end quote. Wanda, please tell us more about the story.
Sure. First, thank you for having me. It's a delight. So anywhere you run, let me just hold up the book because I love the cover. It's so striking. Anywhere you run is the story of two sisters who find themselves in trouble, different sorts of trouble. And they take off running. One heads to the north and the other heads to a small rural town in Georgia. It is the 1964 Jim Crow South in Mississippi, and both sisters feel like running away might be the solution to their respective problems. But what they don't realize is that there is a very dangerous man with dark secrets of his own who is hot on their trail. And so begins the cat and mouse chase. And it is a book that deals with themes around voting rights and racism in the Jim Crow South, as well as a woman's right to govern her own body, and a host of other issues. And so I'll be reading a section where one of the sisters, Violet, is leaving home when she decides to run away. She leaves in the middle of the night. I gazed up at the porch. Me and Marigold still hadn't taken down that puny string of holiday lights from last Christmas hanging along the porch banister. I hadn't wanted to put up a Christmas tree or any kind of decorations after Mama died, but Marigold insisted, saying it was what Mama would have wanted. I didn't argue with her. Marigold was always smarter than me, and it showed whenever we argued. After Rose died, folks always liked to compare me and Marigold like we was two different shoes. Like I was a harlot's high heel and she was a sturdy Oxford. Marigold was the smart one. I was the pretty one. Marigold was the one who made good decisions. I was the one who made fast decisions. Marigold worked hard at getting rid of what she called her accent. Me, I just talked the way I talk. Marigold with all her dreams of going to college and becoming a lawyer. And then there was me. I didn't have no dreams unless I was asleep. So maybe I enjoyed a social outing more than I did a school book, but that didn't make me a bad person. Why people always think things got to be this way or that with nothing in between? Hell, me and Marigold was more alike than we was different. She would understand my leaving.
So thank you so much. Hannah Mary McKinnon. Adele Parks, the #1 Sunday Times bestselling author, states that, quote, "Never Coming Home is a clever, riveting psychological thriller, a witty, dark, and totally absorbing edge-of-your-seat novel that is sure to leave you breathless, shocked, and shouting from the sidelines," end quote. I'm so eager to hear more about Never Coming Home, Anna, so take it away.
Sure. So Never Coming Home. Yeah, there we go. Pops more in real life, but Never Coming Home is a little bit different from all of my other books in the sense that it's written from the antagonist's point of view, which was so much fun to do. So Lucas is not a good person, and that's no spoiler. It's on the back cover. Lucas, the story starts a month after his wife, Michelle, has disappeared. She's missing, and Lucas knows she's never coming home because he organized for a hitman to get rid of her because she's incredibly wealthy, but also incredibly annoying, and he wants her money. So he then receives about a month after her disappearance, where he's sure that he just has to sit back, relax, and wait to cash the check. He receives a series of cryptic photographs and notes because somebody knows what he did, and basically they're onto him. And so he goes from hunter to prey. So I thought I would give you, like Sonia did, a little bit of a taste of his voice. I found I found Lucas rather amusing. I hope other people do too. So this is when he's reflecting about Michelle going missing. Listen, I didn't hate Michelle, and I should probably make that perfectly clear at this point. How could I when she'd give me everything I'd ever wanted? Besides, when I was a kid, my dad always used to say, hate is a strong word, son. And there had been more than a few people in my life who conjured up those emotions far more intensely, not to mention more quickly, than Michelle ever could. No, I didn't hate her, but I certainly didn't like her very much. To put it mildly, my wife annoyed the bollocks off me. I'll bet your partner does it to you too. Or are you really going to pretend when you're in your darkest of dark and private moments, say after another massive row about a continual and baseless jealous streak, the split of household chores, the state of the family finances, or another of the in-laws' backhanded compliments, you've never imagined your other half gone? Fine. So you might not think about slicing them with a Santoku knife while they sleep, or perhaps you do, in which case, who am I to judge? But what about something out of your control? An unfortunate incident. Them keeling over from a sudden heart attack at the supermarket, face planting into the bags of frozen peas, their car skidding on a deadly patch of black ice and wrapping itself around a century-old oak tree. Maybe your approach is more cartoonish, a piano or an anvil falling from the sky, so it feels less Machiavellian. Either way, all these scenarios would be tragic, but after an adequate period of grieving, you'd be free to continue your life exactly as you please. No more maddening habits to put up with, no idiosyncrasies to grit your teeth through, no ugly divorce with extortionate legal fees and heated arguments about who gets the cat. Never crossed your mind? Not once? Yeah, that's what I thought.
That is his wit is so sharp. Think of it like a blade.
Well, thank you. I had fun with Lucas.
Absolutely. So audience members, we're going to move to questions now. And as I ask a few, please jot down your own because we'll allow time at the end to hear from you all. So think about what you've heard and just listen in to as they form, make a note of them. Okay, thank you. So I wanted to ask where the ideas for your latest novels came from. And another question, which was, how did you know that the idea was big enough to carry the entire book? Hank, why don't you start us out?
Oh gosh, I love that about whether the idea was big enough to carry the entire book, you know, because I've been a television reporter for 43 years now, which is quite crazy to think about. And I know as a reporter, and I get hundreds of story ideas, tips from people every week. And somehow my brain has learned that's a good story. That's a good story. That's a good story. And I know every single one of you, and some of them you think, yeah, that's never going to work. That's not interesting. That's not broad enough. That's not big enough. That's not important enough. People won't care about that enough. And I think that's a big element. How much will people care about the story? And then you have to balance that with, I bet every single one of these authors, and so many of you in the audience as well, you know, when you have a good idea and there's this little shiver that goes through your skin and you think, oh yeah, that's going to work. That's just going to work. And you try to poke holes in it and no holes will be poked. It just keeps, you know, it's like the universe just keeps saying, yes, yes, yes. This is a good idea. And sometimes you take those ideas and you keep them for a while. And when it's time for them to blossom into a book, that's when they really take hold. So the idea for Her Perfect Life, about the perfect life of somebody in the spotlight, again, ironic because of course it isn't, began really when I was anchoring the weekend news in Atlanta. And it was, of course, the weekend news is live, and I was coming home really late at night, maybe after midnight on a Saturday night, driving home to my little house in Atlanta. And as I turned the corner into my neighborhood, I saw the street was lined with police cars and with blue lights flashing. And of course, I'm a reporter, and I think, ooh, this is a news story. You know, I should get my notebook out and see what's going on. So I drive closer to my house, and I see that the police cars are at my house. They're at my house, and the police officers are at my house, and they're there for something that happened at my house. So I leaped out of the car, and I went to the nearest police officer, and I said, I'm Hank Phillippi. And he said, yeah, I know who you are. And I said, and that's my house. And he said, yeah, I know that. And I said, well, what happened? What happened? And he said, well, there was somebody who broke into your house, and we caught him. The neighbor called, and that's him in the cruiser over there. And I said, well, why did he break into my house? Why? And the police officer said that this guy had told them that he knew I was live on television. And as a result, he knew I could not be home. So because he knew where I was, he knew where I wasn't. And that was just so chilling to me, the idea that I'm live anchoring the news, so I'm not at my house. And if somebody knows at my house, they know it's empty. And I started thinking, I mean, he didn't take anything, but I started thinking that there are more than material things in someone's house. And what if he had discovered something that I was trying to keep secret, and later use that to harm me or my family? And it was I thought about the vulnerability of being in the spotlight. And that's what grew into Her Perfect Life, because I chose the life in the spotlight, and Lily Atwood in Her Perfect Life chose the life in the spotlight, but her little daughter didn't choose that spotlight. And where do we, as people who are on television, where do we put our families when we choose to have everybody know where we are almost every minute of the day? And that was Her Perfect Life.
Right. You say when also, like with social media, that's exactly what goes on for all of us, right?
Exactly.
So pertinent.
Good point.
Thank you. Wanda, how about you?
So for me, my story, one of the overriding themes of the story is voting rights, and in particular, voting rights for Blacks in the 1960s. The idea came to me in a rather roundabout way. I had just finished up my first project, All Her Little Secrets. I turned that into my editor, and I was looking around for something else to write. And we had just finished up the 2020 election. And there was all this noise and rancor about, the big lie and election fraud. And I live here in Georgia, and I witnessed these hugely long lines for people to vote. And I thought to myself, how did we get here? But I thought this would be a really interesting topic to write about. But I couldn't really figure out a contemporary angle for the story. So I decided, if I'm thinking, how did we get here? Let me go back to the origins of voting rights for Blacks in this country. And that took me back to 1965. And as I started to research the Voting Rights Act of 1965, I discovered that really the fight for voting rights actually started long before that, with Medgar Evers' work in Mississippi and a whole host of truly brave people who were fighting for the right for Blacks to vote in this country. So I backed it up to 1964. And the book actually opens with a scene, infamous murder of 3 civil rights activists who had come to Mississippi to help Black Mississippians get the right to vote. And, to Hank's point, once I kind of zeroed in on that scene and that topic, I was like, yeah, this just might be the one. I think this might be a story that I could pull together that might have some meaningful impact.
Right. And to write something where I'm assuming from what you're saying that you were learning along the way more in-depth material about history and
Right, because I had to research this particular topic. And it it's interesting because the more I researched, the more I thought, oh my gosh, can I write this story? It's such a big and important topic. But yeah, it did require quite a bit of research.
And for people like us who write commercial fiction, part of the idea of a big idea is whether someone else will be interested in reading it. Will someone else care? I mean, we can write whatever we want to write for ourselves, but we're trying to reach out to readers and have them want to read what we've written. So that's another element of a big idea. Is it just us, or is it a bigger universal theme that we can bring to our books?
Right.
Right.
And with this book coming out just 2 days ago, it couldn't be more timely with the elections coming up. That's
Yeah,
wonderful.
exactly.
Thank you. Hannah, how about you?
Well, Never Coming Home was really a little bit different from how the other ideas from my other books came about, because this one was really from watching movies and TV shows where you find yourself rooting for the antagonist. And I was at the movies with one of my lads, and we were watching this movie, and we're just laughing our heads off. And I thought, how do they do this? These are bad people, and we're rooting for them. You know what? There's going to be something wrong with us, or somehow the writers have just brought us in, and you know, how did they do that? And can I do that? And I also wanted to write something funnier, because while 3 of my 6 books have been COVID releases, this one was the one I wrote during the pandemic and edited in the pandemic and released during the pandemic. So this really is my pandemic book. The others, Sister Dear and You Will Remember Me, were written before. And my mum passed as well in July 2020, just as I'd plotted Never Coming Home, but I just started writing it. And it was just horrible because I couldn't get to Switzerland to see her. The whole pandemic and everything. This was just still early in the pandemic in 2020. And I felt overwhelmed, and I felt lost, and I was angry, and I was upset, and all these, just a bundle of emotion. And I needed somewhere to go and have a laugh. And Lucas basically just showed up beforehand, but his voice in particular, when I sat down to write the first chapter, he was just there. And he was going, all right, come on, then tell my story. I'm a cheeky chap, come on, you know. And he was, you know, he's a bad guy, blah, blah, all that. I know that. But he had such a sense of humor. I could go into this story and laugh and wreak havoc safely. You know, nobody in real life gets hurt or anything, but just play with that and play with, how do I get people, even though he does these terrible things, to still almost want him to get away with it. Or maybe completely want him to get away with it. You know, I won't judge, as Lucas wouldn't either. So that was really where the idea came from. And in terms of how did I know it had legs? I think it was just his voice was so compelling to me. And I thought about the situation, and I built his backstory in my head, and I thought, yeah, okay, I have a story here to tell. And I knew for the first time, I don't think this has happened to me ever, when I plot my books very heavily, but I knew the last word. That will never happen again. I'm under no illusion, but I knew the last word, except in the book it starts with a C, not an F, and that's quite deliberate. Anyone who's read it knows what I mean. It was really quite extraordinary, and during that horrible time, it was exactly what I needed.
Yeah, writing is catharsis, and
yes,
it was
escape,
cathartic to
really.
read that too.
Yeah, it was an escape from reality, because everything just seemed so hopeless. So I'd get up in the morning and it was just a joy to meet my murderous friend.
Right. Sonia.
Yeah, just jumping off Hannah Mary. It's so great that in this genre, we don't always have to like our characters. I mean, we like them, but we don't want to, like, we can like them and root for them without wanting to be friends with them or trusting them in our own home kind of thing. I love that.
Yes.
And what you were saying about, you were just compelled by the voice. I think whether knowing something's big enough, it's sort of like, are we engaged enough? Because if we're bored, our readers are going to be bored. Or if there's too much going on and we're confused, I think that the readers are also going to be confused and say, okay, this is way too much. It's not believable anymore. So I think there's that gut test and just sort of trusting what you would read. Because I mean, for me, I wrote romance and women's fiction before I came to this genre as a reader. So I think that's sort of how I try and write, as like as a fan of these amazing authors and many others. So as far as how I came up with Are You Sarah, the main idea, sort of this rideshare switch, came from me waiting for an Uber very late one night on King Street in Toronto. And, there is a woman across the road waiting for her Uber. Our cars arrived at the same time. They were the same cars. And I just sort of found myself wondering, okay, what would have happened if I switched places? And I got carried away. And then when I finally had time to write this book and thought, oh, maybe just explore it, see what happens. That was just sort of a concept. I didn't have the characters yet. I didn't have the themes. And so I ended up bringing up some other stuff that I thought about a lot. Sarah, as you can tell from her voice, she's kind of a badass, right? And there's this word called shalak in a lot of South Asian languages. I learned it in Punjabi. That means essentially like cunning or clever, devious, manipulative. It's derogatory usually against women. And I found myself wondering, like, I've always wanted to write a character who was Chalak, right? Like my dad would call me Chalak when I tried to manipulate him into letting me stay out later than I was allowed to in high school, those kinds of things, like as a joke. So I really loved playing with that idea of a strong female character. And then also the third element, something I'd always wanted to write about, is power dynamics between men and women, people of color and white people, marginalized, and those who have a lot. And especially in the sense of Sarah, she's a law student and she works for a very senior white man lawyer, and having worked for 1 year at a law firm where I was, young woman in my 20s and working with older men, I always found that power dynamic in the corporate world fascinating when you're essentially a kid thrown into this very adult world. So that was something else that I wanted to explore as well.
It's amazing. I love the whole idea of writing through a derogatory stereotype and then seeing it through to what's on the other side of that, and working with that in your characterization. So you have been speaking a little bit, Sonia, to what drew you to writing in the thriller genre, kind of referring to that unreliable narrator. And Hannah, you as well are talking about that, I think. And I'm just curious if we could maybe go into that a bit more deeply. Why did you choose to write thrillers? How did you come to this particular? Sometimes I think genres are just a term to help people shelve their books, but it does give you a few, it is helpful when a person loves that kind of read to gravitate toward those books. And as a writer, I wonder what compelled you to work in that field of suspense, mystery, intrigue. And let's see, Hannah, could you start us off with that?
Sure. I'm a bit of a goody two-shoes, in school, I always did my homework on time. I took a course last year. I did all of my homework ahead of time because, I'm that person. When my kids have papers from school, they used to have stuff to fill in and whatnot. It'd be done straight away. It's just how I'm wired. Which has always worked out really well for my bosses because I don't miss deadlines ever, I guess. So I'm a rule follower. I'm not a rule breaker. I've never, I'm not a rule breaker at all. But I am in my books in the sense that my characters can do all of these things. Lucas does these terrible, terrible, awful things and thinks these terrible things and says these things in his mind and justifies them. that I would never do, but it's just so interesting to explore what might that be like. What kind of a person are you to hire a hitman on the dark web to get rid of your really wealthy spouse? And what is it like to put yourself in the shoes of that person? So that's what really drew me to, especially this book, but it's really just the darker side. It's an exploration of what it's like really to be a bad person. There have been a couple in my books. There was one in You Will Remember Me, not quite as clear-cut obvious that they were up to no good. And it's also, I guess, an exploration of fear of stuff that could happen. And while I have very much, I have to say that real quick though, I've absolutely adored writing a rom-com. It's the first one I've written in a decade. And it's been so much fun having people fall in love. And, it's just been absolutely lovely. I think it's actually tipping my next suspense novel even more murdery and darker, because I can. I'm just fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by rule breakers and why they do these things, and do they get, is justice served in the end? Not necessarily. And what does it look like if it isn't? So it's an exploration of all of that.
Great, thank you. Wanda, how about you?
So for me, I think I came to thrillers because it's interesting. I've always loved stories that are fast-paced, that move at a really good clip. And I was reading all these authors who wrote these kinds of books. And I thought, oh, this is really great. I love this book. I love the plot. I wonder if I could find a book like this with a character that looks like me. Black, female, a little overweight. Probably a character like that might make some different choices than characters in the books that I was reading that were written by white males, for example. And I had a hard time finding that book. And I think it was Toni Morrison who said, if you can't find the book you want to read, then you write it. And I didn't really kind of set out and say, okay, Toni, may you rest in heaven, I'm going to do it. But I really did have this desire to see books with characters that look like me, that made decisions that were probably flawed, but nonetheless, they persevered and they came out on top. And so that's how I came to write my first book. With the second book, I kind of told you how I thought about the plot. And in thinking about the characters for that book, I wanted, I have this fascination with sibling relationships. I think all my books have some sort of sibling relationship. And for me, I thought, yeah, I need sisters in this book. I again need strong women. So I think I came to this particular genre, if you will, simply because I love it. I love the kinds of books that grab me, at the first page and drag me along. But I wanted to see books that, for lack of a better phrase, books that had characters that looked like me. They weren't police detectives. They weren't, professional investigators. It was just like one Black woman who got caught up in a really bad situation, and how would she get out of it?
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Hank, how about you in terms of genre?
Oh gosh, I don't think I chose. I don't think it was a conscious decision that I'm going to write a thriller. I grew up in really rural Indiana, so rural that you couldn't see another house from our house. And my sister and I used to ride our ponies to the library to get books, and we would fill up the saddlebags with books and read up in the hayloft of the barn behind our house. And I read Sherlock Holmes. I mean, my family lost me for a month because I was up reading Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. I remember reading Murder on the Orient Express and just falling in love with that book and falling in love with how smart it was and how witty it was, you know, and the ending. And you think, what? How did she do that? And I thought maybe it would be fun to be a mystery author when I grew up. And I was 12 at that time. And then I started thinking, well, maybe it would be more fun to be Hercule Poirot. When I went into middle school, though, I was so geeky and nerdy and unpopular, and I had a terrible time. And my only friends were characters in books. And I was really ostracized and really, I mean, they voted me most individual in middle school. They put which I knew meant most misfit, you know, geekiest, most, we don't want to sit with you at lunch. They put my picture in the school paper upside down because I was so weird. And that was the moment where I thought, I'm going to live my life so that nobody else gets treated like a little guy like I was. So no one else gets treated like I do. And that's why I went into journalism, to tell those kinds of stories, to stick up for the little guy and to get some justice. And I did that for 30 years before I started writing fiction. And then I started thinking that I could write a thriller about justice and make it turn out the way I wanted it to turn out, where the good guys win and the bad guys get what's coming to them. And in the end, you can change the world a little bit and you can get some kind of justice. I mean, I did that, I think, for however many years, 40 years as a television reporter, 43. And that's what I'm going for in my novels as well, that I can make the world come out the way it should, that there should be justice, that the little guy is stood up for and the bad guys get their just desserts. And you can do that in a thriller. And I love the idea of being able to write a book where someone closes the book at the end and they say, I didn't see that coming. And yes, that's just the way this should have worked. And it's a really kind of empowering to be able to write a book like that. So I think we get a little bit of control of the world as when we're writing books like this.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I know as a reader, for me, that is really satisfying to read a book like a mystery or a suspense novel and to feel that, these obstacles seem insurmountable. I have no idea how someone could solve this or fix this. And then at the end to really feel that relief and that sense of, it is working. Or another kind of joy, which is with an unreliable narrator, where I'm like, oh, wow, that doesn't work out the way I was expecting it at all.
Exactly. And
part
that's
of that
fun.
surprise is the joy of it. Yeah, I'm sorry, Hank, I think you
Inevitable.
froze a little bit.
Oh, am I back?
You're back.
Okay. It's really fun to read a book that's surprising and inevitable. We all, I think our readers, the readers of all four of our novels, they're smart. You all are smart. And you're all trying to figure out what's going to happen in these novels, just like we all do when we're reading novels or watching crime fiction or on television. And I love to be the one to say, not so fast. Watch what I'm going to do now, and pull the rug right out from under you. So that's a joy as well.
Yeah. Sonia, from romance to thriller, how did you make that move and why?
Well, it was a big surprise to me, actually. I've always loved thrillers, but I've always loved reading everything. The whole idea of genre, I didn't really understand until I sort of started writing and than working in the publishing industry as well. To me, and like a lot of us, a good book was just a good book. I read what was recommended to me, what I found on shelves. It was all over the place, but it did include a lot of thrillers and a lot of sort of rom-com women's fiction type stuff. And then as far as writing goes, writing was always just a way of expressing where I was. So when I was, a teenager, it was a lot of like angsty stuff about wanting to let my life to start and leave my hometown of Saskatoon. And then when I started writing The Matchmaker's List, my first romance, I was in my mid-20s. And I was at that place where, not my parents in particular, but society and, people in my community, it's sort of the expectation is once you're done school or college or whatever, and you have a job, you got to get married, you got to have babies, buy a house, do all this, do that rat race. And I was really sort of, if someone tells me what to do, I do the exact opposite. And I was very sort of bitter about this idea that my life was planned out for me because I was a woman, I had to do things a certain way. So I wrote about that, and that became a romance novel. I didn't know it was a romance novel when I started, but there was a happy ever after, and it was a little funny, I think. So it sort of made sense that it was shaped in that way. And then so I was doing that, and then I'd had this sort of Uber switch idea in the back of my head. And similar to Hannah Mary, and I'm so sorry that you'd had such a terrible 2020 with your loss, and and I'm sure lots of people around the world were struggled, and even I struggled, and I was relatively lucky and safe at home when working at my kitchen table, and I was sort of in this dark place, and so I had a little bit of time before my next romance deadline. So I just thought, I'm going to try writing this book and see what happens. And because I was in this dark place, it kind of worked out, and so that's how it happened. And then ever since then, I've had about 1 million ideas of how to kill people. So I hope to keep going.
Great. Thank you.
Welcome to our club. We're so glad you're here.
Thank you.
My husband and I were out to dinner back in the before times, and I was seriously talking to him about an upcoming book. And I said something like, well, you can't just throw someone off a bridge because you can't be sure they'll die. And the waiter comes up and says, ma'am, and I said, no, it's for a book. It's for a book. So Sonia, that's coming up. That'll happen to you soon.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
I love that these you all seem to be just so gracious to each other and to be here, and that at the same time you're having to explore these dark topics. Could you talk just a little bit about your writing process and some of the challenges, other than not being able to throw someone off a bridge, but some of the biggest challenges you face in writing as you write? And I'm thinking all of you have come from, you have had major careers, and you're balancing these worlds, not to mention family life and all the other things that you have in your lives that you care about. So I'm wondering if you could just begin by exchanging notes with each other on what it's like to balance writing as a woman with, these other kinds of careers and passions.
Well, I'll start because that was my biggest challenge in writing my first book. I have 3 kids. I was working as a corporate lawyer. I was having to travel. I at the time, I was managing a team on the West Coast. I'm in Atlanta. I was managing a team that was based in LA. And so I was having to travel cross country a couple times a month, and had started to write this book. Fun fact, I was writing the book in secret as well. So I hadn't told anybody, not even my own husband, that I was writing this book. So for me, it was always a challenge to find time to write. But what I did is I made those things that made it so challenging, I took them and used them to my advantage. So for example, when I had to travel cross country, I used that time to write. So I had a solid block of, 4 or 5 hours on an airplane in an airport. And because I'm a dinosaur and I write everything in longhand for my first drafts, all I needed was paper and pen. And so I could write pretty much everywhere. And so I was writing inside my car while I was waiting on my kids to get out of track practice or piano lesson. So for me, it was always finding the time to write, because I think if it's important to you, you prioritize it. That's the way I feel about it, especially now. But again, the other issue for me now that I've written 2 books and I'm writing a third, is that I have the most inefficient writing process in the world. First and foremost is by longhand. So I'm writing everything out by longhand, then I'm transferring that into a computer, and then I'm editing as I'm putting that into the computer. And then I print that out, and now I get my red pen and I am revising by hand. And so I always tell people, do what works for you. Don't necessarily follow my process, because I'm killing trees and probably working on a bad case of arthritis in the process.
Oh, wow. Why did you keep it a secret?
I was that unsure about my writing skills. I did not feel like I was competent to be a writer. The thing is, I had a job, I had kids, I have the talent to write. You have a real job, Nobody told me any of these things. I told myself these things. I always tell people the biggest impediment to my getting published was myself, because I did not think that I was competent enough to be a writer. And it was only when I applied to a writing workshop, and wonder of wonders, I got in. And I realized, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to be away for 2 weeks. And so my husband's going to have to take care of the kids. And it was then that I confessed to my husband that I had written a book. And he was like dumbfounded. He was like, you wrote a book? And I was like, yeah, I wrote a book. But he's been my biggest cheerleader, because he's like, what is the book about? And I told him, and he was like, ooh, that sounds really good. But yeah, I just didn't think that I was capable of doing something as gargantuan as writing and completing a book.
Thank you. Does that resonate with any of the rest of you, or have you had other challenges that are more?
Resonates with me a lot. In fact, I remember signing up for a writing course with Curtis Brown, a big UK-based agency. And I signed up for a course. They had 10 spots or 15 spots or something. And I don't know how many applicants they had. And I thought, well, because it was expensive too. And I thought, well, if I get in, I'll worry about it then, And then I did. And I remember saying to Rob, to my husband, sign up for this writer's course, and they gave me a spot, and I'm going to do it. And it was all online, but it was, a similar kind of experience. And, I don't think, when people ask me, the typical question, so what do you do? I don't know why they have a deep voice when they ask you that, but, so what do you do for a living? Ask people what they do for fun. That's always more interesting. But, so what do you do? I think until Sister Dear published, so Sister Dear was my 4th book, I would always say, well, I used to be the CEO of an IT recruitment company, but now I write. I always needed that crutch, that ego thing, I guess. There was an ego thing or a crutch. I wasn't sure what I was doing. It was kind of a mixture of that. And I completely agree, Wanda. The biggest obstacle for me as well was me. I remember saying to Rob, I don't know, after umpteen rejections, I don't know, this is never going to work. I'm never going to get anywhere. It's a pipe dream, and giving myself obstacles. And he said, stop doing that, And I recently heard in a Fitbit meditation, here's my little gem of wisdom that I heard the other day, think of rejection as redirection. And I thought, oh, I wish I'd heard that, 10 years ago. I don't know if I'd have listened, to be fair, but I just found that really, really insightful. So it's about, and I am very fortunate that I do this full time. I do have three sons. They're all commuting to different universities, which makes me feel like a taxi driver sometimes. But other than that, I can write full time. So I'm very fortunate about that.
Thank you. So Hank and Sonia, for you, challenges or what your writing process is like?
Oh yeah, this is all resonating. One of definitely the biggest impediments was just, again, the confidence. I was working at a publishing house based out of Toronto until recently, and my colleagues didn't know about my book until like 2 months before it came out. This is at a publishing house, like a different publishing house, because they read it somewhere and they're like, "Is this you?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's me." Like I just was really weird talking about it, and I think part of it is because I think for a lot of writers, it's so personal. And then all of a sudden this dream starts to happen and you like don't even know how to deal with it, at least for me, because it was all of a sudden it's like, oh my God, people are actually going to read what I think about this. And so it's very, very something that I'm still working on for sure. And then as far as like just the process of writing, just like maybe on the craft thing is like, I'm kind of like Hannah Mary. I'm a huge plotter. I like to know where I'm going. I find myself able to be more creative without having to make, this is just a personal thing, without having to make big decisions on the go. Just sort of knowing a general direction allows me to sort of figure out a cool path there. But when I'm working on my next thriller, I'm actually finding that plotting is working to my disadvantage, because I realized that quite recently, actually, so I'm starting over, is that I was trying to be too clever. I was trying to be too cunning and and I was just like making it too complicated. And like I was saying before, I just couldn't even understand what I was doing anymore. And I was losing sort of the reason I was writing this book in the first place. So I had to go back and sort of rework it, and it's going better. It's going better now, hopefully.
Yeah. Good to hear. Thank you.
I just interviewed Ben Mesrick, who was a wonderful author who wrote The Accidental Billionaire in 2021. And we were talking about this very thing. And he says, and he's incredibly successful. He says that what he does every day when he sits down at the computer to write, he says to himself, this is going to be awesome. And I thought, wow, I've never thought that. I've never thought that in my life. So I want you all to remember that, because now every day, starting after I talk to Ben, now every day I sit at this right here at this desk and I say to myself, this is going to be awesome. And sometimes my husband comes in and says, is it awesome yet? I'm like, no, it isn't really yet. So it's interesting to hear you all, because I started exactly the opposite way and came to my realization of incompetence a little bit later. I had been a television reporter for 30 years when and I was sitting at my desk at Channel 7 when I had this, what I knew was a really good idea, apropos of what we were talking about earlier. I knew it was a good idea. And I came home and I said to my husband, sweetheart, I have a great idea for a thriller. I'm gonna write a thriller. I'm gonna write a book. And he says, great, honey. He says, do you know how to write a book? And I'm like, how hard can it be? I've read a million of them. I've got a million books. How hard can it be? And, with a little bit of logic to it, I'd been a television reporter for 30 years at that time. So I'd essentially written a story every day with a character who you care about and a problem that needs to be solved. So, an important problem that needs to be solved where something can change. And as I said earlier, in the end, you can get justice and change the world a little bit. So I thought, what could be so hard about making stuff up? That's going to be easier than just using the facts. And I sat here at this very desk in this very chair and thought, okay, now I'm going to make stuff up. And then I thought, how do you do that? How do you do that? And my first draft of my first book, Primetime, as I'm typing along thinking, this is great. I'm a natural. I'm a storyteller. How hard can it be? Turned out to be 723 pages long. So it was. So I had to cut 400 pages. And that was the biggest That was the most education I've ever had in writing, was learning what didn't work, what was derivative, what was not funny, what was showing off, what was tangential, all that kind of stuff just went. Now, as I'm now writing my 15th novel, now is when I think, oh my golly, how do you write a book? I just don't know. And unlike Sonia and Hannah, I don't plot at all. I have no idea what's going to happen next. And that's one of the wonderful things, is that my book surprises me every day. And that's what gets me to the computer, is thinking, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. And I won't know until I write it. I'm the only one who can figure that out. So that's the awesome, or sometimes terrible, part for me now, is that every day is a surprise and every day is different. And all I know is that I've done it before somehow, and I must be able to do it again. And that's what sort of keeps me going.
Great. Thank you.
I'm curious, because I am a plotter as well, like Sonia and Hannah, but I never know how my books are going to end. Do you two ladies know how your books are going to end as part of your plotting process? Like, I'll plot up to a certain point and then I stop because I can't figure out how it will end.
I know how it's going to end for sure.
You do?
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, it's so, I love that, Hank, because I wish I should try doing that one day and see what happens. Because for me, I think I go through all the possibilities at the beginning. There's this like phase where I just sort of, write down stream of consciousness, like all the sort of possibilities of characters and vignettes and, different ways the plot can move. And then I kind of just sort of, exploring all these realities, I kind of pick the one I think works best and then sort of write it out in a coherent way, I guess. Sometimes things do change. Like, I'm not so rigid that if something better comes to me or if something doesn't work, I'm often changing things. But as far as like who did it and why and what are the red herrings, those things I do know and I don't think have changed. But I don't know.
It's so interesting, because I think as a reporter, I don't know how my news stories will end. I don't know how my investigations will end. If I did, then they wouldn't be news. So I'm looking for something new. So every day as a reporter, I'm going out in search of the story, of watching what people do, of hearing what people think, of watching the decisions they make and the obstacles that are put up in front of them. And that's what I think what I'm doing when I'm writing my novels. I'm in search of the story. So I've had editors say to me, can you just send me an outline? And I say, no, I'm so sorry, because how do I know what happens? And Sonia, I think this is applicable to you. How do I know what happens until it happens? Just when you see what decisions the characters make, when you see what situations they result in, when you see what the weather is, when you see what they say to each other, and when you decide what they want and how far they'll go to get it. And that's what I ask myself every day. What does someone want and how far will they go to get it? I can't know what happens at the end because it hasn't happened yet.
See, if I didn't know what happens at the end, I'd probably write 700 odd pages to try and figure out what happens at the end. I'd be meandering around, and I if I drive somewhere, I need a map. And I feel the same way when I write a book. Before I actually start plotting, I always start with, where are my characters at the beginning? Or kind of, what's the story? What's the what if? What's the big idea? Who are the characters? Where are they physically and emotionally at the beginning? And where are they at the end? Are they still alive? Might they be dead? Because if I don't know, I can't plot. And I need to plot the big, stepping stones. I say it like crossing a river. I know I've got to get across the other side of the river to point B, but there are no stepping stones. So I have to drop some big ones in and then smaller ones. But I, like Sonny, I'm not rigid with it. I don't feel constricted by the plot, and things do move around. But yeah, I do need to know the end, Wanda. Otherwise I'm just, I don't know what to write. Where am I going?
So maybe I'm a hybrid between you and Hank and Sonia, because I do plot, but up to a certain point. And
I think it's just such a revelation about how we're all sort of doing the same thing, and it clearly works in such different ways.
Yes.
And so it proves that there's no way, there's no secret if we only knew. And it doesn't have to be the same for every book either.
Mhm. True. That's very true.
Mhm.
Very true.
Thank you. Courtney, I wanted to check in and see if it's time to hear some audience questions.
I think so, but actually a lot of the questions that have come in, the panel has answered quite well, because we had quite a few on, first of all, what does it mean to plot a book very heavily? And I think hopefully after that discussion, that question has been answered, how you plan the plot ahead of time. Because another question was, are you all plotters or pantsers? Which I had to Google, and then thank you all. You all answered that question. So Margie asked that question about what it means to plot. So let us know if that did not answer your question about what Hannah meant by that.
I mean, it's interesting because George R.R. Martin, who wrote Game of Thrones, doesn't call us plotters or pantsers. He calls them architects and gardeners.
Ooh,
that architects, don't you? Architects build the scaffolding first of the story, and then they fill in the drywall, and then finally the wallpaper, and then the decorations. And gardeners plant the seed of a story and cultivate it and take care of it and see what blossoms. And it either way works. Either way is fine. And I think I love that way of describing it.
I see that Anissa wrote in the chat that I am a plotzer. I like that. Thank you, Anissa. A plotzer.
That's great. So is there another question from the audience, or
we have several, so we'll try to get to them. Let's touch a bit on your careers outside of writing, because we did have a question. How did you decide to give up your careers to become full-time authors? How supportive is your family? And also an interesting question along with that, when you are doing a non-writing job, do you find your mind going to your story idea instead?
Oh gosh, I pushed my corporate career off a cliff, so unintentionally. So when we came to, my husband's Canadian, we met. I was living in Switzerland where I grew up. He moved over. We had the kids. He was a stay-at-home dad. I was the CEO of the company, and then we decided to move to Canada. So that's the Canadian connection. And when we came here, I decided to start my own business, and it was going to be the best thing since sliced bread. It was going to be awesome. We were all going to be millionaires, and it was going to be fantastic, and it failed. It crashed and burned. It was a new spin on HR, and it just died within 12 months. And I had no idea what I was going to do next. And then the writing career came along. So that my writing career is my second career, and was born from failure. And because of the failure from my business that I started, I think that lit a real fire under my backside and in my gut that this writing gig, I would succeed, because I just failed, and it hurt, and it was horrible and awful and horrible. And I did not want that to happen again. So I was so determined that I was gonna make it. And as for thinking about other stuff, my husband has an electrical contracting company, and I'm a trained accountant, so I do all the finances. And yeah, when I'm inputting invoices, I find my mind going to my characters, Frankie, and the next one going, oh, I wonder if Frankie could, oh, hold on, just let me input this invoice and then make a quick note about what Frankie might be doing. So yes, I do have a tendency of thinking about my characters all the time and talking to them, which amuses my family, and they're incredibly supportive. My son the other day said to me, and I quote, "It's a bit weird that you know how to kill people and how to hide the bodies, Mom. Sometimes it's a bit worrying." He's 18.
Great compliment.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think that I am a full-time writer as of a few months ago. And again, could be temporary. I moved from Toronto to Vancouver a year and a half ago. No, but I worked all while writing the first 5 books. So I would do it after work. I mean, I don't have kids and I have a very supportive husband. So I would do it after work. I would do it on the weekends. Sometimes on lunch break if I could, but it's kind of awkward. I don't really like having people around when I write. I kind of just become a hermit. And I also had a fire in my belly because I wanted to I wanted to have more time to do this. I didn't like having to sacrifice seeing friends or going to the gym or having like a personal life to write. And so I definitely wanted to have that balance. And now I'm in a place where, at least for this year, I'm able to write both. And I hope to continue doing that, but we'll see.
Thank you.
Dennis Lehane used to talk about how he thought about his manuscript so much that when he would get home from whatever he was doing, he was surprised that more of it wasn't written.
Sounds about right.
It does feel like, it goes through our brain all the time. When I had this good idea for a novel that I was telling you about earlier, I was 55. And I thought, if I don't do this now, it was 15 years ago, if I don't do this now, when am I going to do this? So I was a full-time reporter at Channel 7 then and was for years after that. But I wrote every night, every weekend. We never took a vacation. We stopped going out to dinner. We stopped going to movies. My darling husband, who was incredibly supportive throughout, ate a lot of carry-out salmon. That is all I can say. He was a really good sport about it. And then as it started to, knock on wood, work, if anything ever, there's nothing that's reliable about being an author, being a published author, nothing that's reliable about it. I started thinking, if I keep having half my life as a television reporter, which is 24/7 on call, election day, blizzards and tornadoes, I wired myself with hidden cameras and confronted corrupt politicians and went undercover and in disguise. And I thought, do I need to keep doing this? Or can I turn to something that I really want to be doing more right now? And I finally decided, and I can put it this way, I finally decided to declare victory in television and turn my total self to being an author. And that's what I'm doing now. There's still a lot of carry-out salmon, though, I do have to say.
Gosh, for me, when I was doing all that writing in secret and on airplanes and, on my lunch break, I used to dream about, it would be so great to just do this full time. And why can't I? And at the time I was doing it, I had, kids in private school and, mortgage and all that stuff. So I knew realistically I couldn't do it. By the time my first book published, All Her Little Secrets, my older kids had gone off to college and I had just the one. And I was still thinking, okay, maybe there'll come a day. But then the book kind of got to be larger than I ever thought it would be. I am still so very grateful for every reader, librarian, bookseller who, so graciously rounded behind this book. And the book just started to grow and grow and grow. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to take a little break from the legal practice and I'll focus on this book and then I'll go back. But I haven't gone back and I don't think I ever will. Never say never. I still keep my bar license active because to Hank's point, nothing is ever guaranteed in this business. But once I kind of caught the bug, if you will, I just couldn't envision doing what I was doing before when I'm doing the very thing that I love and gets me out of bed every day. So,
I mean, it's really a moment. If one is lucky enough to be able to think, well, someone else has health insurance and we'll be able to pay them. I mean, it's really a massive financial risk to do this. And there are also things, I mean, I think we each had jobs that we thought maybe we would never give this up, that this is what we were, you know, as Hannah was saying, that she was a big executive, and Sonia and Wanda are lawyers, and I'm a television reporter, and I still work at Channel 7. I mean, I still, you know, have one little foot in that tent. But there is a moment, and I think it's about intent, where we think, you know what, this is our one life, and we have something that we're passionate about, and it's time to, let's just, you know, I have a sign on my bulletin board right here. Let's see if I can get it down. Come on, it's magnetized. That says, leap and the net will appear. Leap and the net will appear. And so sometimes you just got to say, you know what? Okay, I don't know what's going to happen, just like in writing my books, but I'm going to give this a try.
This is mine. It says, excuse me, it is never too late to be what you might have been. And I always wanted to write. And like you said, you have a moment, and I just thought, this is what I've always wanted to do. And if I don't do it now, then when? Yeah.
But just to add quickly, it's like, I mean, all four of us, it seems like we've all drawn from our real life in our own material. And I think that's something that I really value, that although it, you know, it was kind of a drag to feel like I was working all the time and writing all the time, that I got so much inspiration by actually living a really, like, you know, by doing different kinds of jobs, and by traveling and meeting all sorts of different kinds of people. That's where my material came from, and sort of inspired me even more. So although, you know, it's a drag, it's really inspiring, I think, to sort of have other lives and other versions of ourselves out there.
I so agree with you. There's an author, Catherine Hall Page, who's an extremely successful writer, who's written, you know, a series of 22, I think, novels in her books. But she said to me once, "Oh, I wish you had started writing sooner. Then we, you know, I wish you could have started writing when I started writing. Then we could have come up through the ranks together." And I said, you know, I couldn't, I'm not the person I was now. I mean, back then I was a different person. The person I am now is the person who can attempt to write a novel, given just exactly as you say, Sonia, who I am and where I've been and what experiences I have allowed me to turn that into fiction. If I had started writing earlier, my books would be completely different. It's all about the experiences that we have, that we bring to our books.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I couldn't have written all her little secrets, you know, 20 years ago.
Sure.
I didn't have the life and the bandwidth to have written something like that.
Thank you all so much for your answers. In the sake of time, I'm going to ask one more question. I'm going to kind of combine Karen's last question with a question from the audience. I'll ask each of you if you could share what project you are working on, if you can share with us, and if not, share what book you have on your nightstand that you're currently reading.
And Karen, you should answer too.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. I'll go last if there's time. I want to hear from all of you.
Hannah, why don't you go first?
Go on,
Hannah, you go first.
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. So I have a thriller publishing in May, which is called The Revenge List. And it's about an anger management group therapy exercise gone terribly, terribly wrong, where the protagonist writes a forgiveness list, people she could work to forgive if she wanted to, and then they start having these bizarre accidents after she loses the list in an Uber. How fancy that, there's an Uber in this one. So that's the thriller. And then I have my rom-com, tentatively called The Christmas Wager, as Holly Cassidy, that publishes in October, which is a rival to lovers story that takes place in the fictional village of Maple Falls in Colorado, which is loosely based on some of the places where I grew up in Switzerland. But that's all, just the place, nothing else that happened. And nobody dies. Yay!
Who next?
Hank, why don't you go next?
Okay, we're also being so careful not to talk over each other because of the technology. I have a book coming out in February about which I'm so excited. It's called The House Guest. And it stars, thank you, Wanda. Wanda has read it. Thank you, Hannah has read it. This is kind of great. Thank you. It stars Alyssa McAllen. And Sonia, I'm sending it to you. Forget about it. That's going to be in your mailbox. It stars Alyssa McAllen, who is a happily married, she thinks, woman who spends her life taking care of her husband, and it's her choice to do that. And one day her husband just up and leaves, takes his computer, takes his suitcase, says, I'm going, I'm not coming back, forget about it. And she is absolutely devastated. And she can't figure, she's baffled and she's a little bit frightened because her husband is absolutely terrifying and seems to be terrorizing her and seems to be doing things to make her very unhappy. He's also taken all the friends and threatens to take all the money. He has all the power and she has none. And what she really needs is an ally. And she pretty soon after, as the book begins, she finds an ally, a seductive new friend who is running from problems of her own. And they decide maybe they can solve each other's problems. So it's sort of Gaslight meets Thelma and Louise. And that is The House Guest. And I'm 80,000, well, let me see, I'll look at my chart, 84,703 words into, I have a chart here. It's 80,473 words into one wrong word. And soon, you all, I will know what happens in the end. But right now, I have no idea.
Awesome.
That sounds really great. I can't wait to read it. And I'm sorry, my dog was barking at the neighbors. So someone asked, this is Joey, my dog, who was surprisingly cooperated and sleeping up until 1 minute ago. So my next book under Sonia Lalli is my next rom-com. It's called Jasmine and Jake Rock the Boat. I just shared the cover this week, and it is a enemies to lovers romance set on an Alaskan cruise ship, which was fun. I did that when I was 18 with my family, so I thought I'd recall those memories. And then my next thriller, I don't have a date. Let me see, I'm going to do the word count, 31,000 something into it. And I'm still a little shaky about it, but right now, don't tell anyone. It's called, tentatively called Till Death They Part. And it takes place at a Crazy Rich Asian style South Asian destination wedding. And the bride and groom are found dead the morning of their wedding. Very different than the romance.
Sounds great. That sounds great.
So for me, I am working on my next book, which is set in the southern coastal region of Georgia, down near the Brunswick, Savannah, Sapelo Islands area. And it is about a young woman who has to overcome some personal insecurities to save a Black landowner when she uncovers a scheme that takes away the land and generational wealth of poor and disenfranchised people.
Wow.
Yeah, all the happy little things I usually write about. You can expect more of that.
Can't wait to read it.
Me too. Absolutely. And on my nightstand, I have Her Perfect Life by Hank Phillippi Ryan and Anywhere You Run by Wanda M. Morris, and Are You Sarah by S.C. Lalli, and Never Coming Home by Mary McKinnon. Literally, I've been enjoying reading your work so much. So thank you all for being with us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much. This is really nice.
Yeah, this is great. This has been wonderful, you all. It's terrific to see you all. And thank the audience for coming. What a wonderful,
Yes.
what a wonderful group of
Thank you,
people.
audience.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
for being
authors.
here.
Thank you all. Thank you, Karen, for being an excellent moderator. And thank you, authors, for taking the time, and everyone for joining us from Canada, East Coast, West Coast. We appreciate you. So thank you all. Have a wonderful night.